Now, there are probably some of you here who don't know who I am, and I will just introduce myself. I'm Ron Butler, one of the elders here, and we're in the really the middle of a series where the elders decided to, on their own, do their studying, prepare themselves, and to present over a 2-week period each of the 4 Gospels. So I think we started with Matthew. Jim did that. Lane finished up Mark last week, no, a week before. We missed a week. Mark over here is going to do the Gospel of John, so I'm here for Luke. Tell you a little bit about Luke. I just picked up one of the Pew Bibles, and if you've ever read the introduction to the books in the Bible that are in the Pew Bible, here's what it has to say about Luke. The Gospel of Luke has been called the most beautiful book ever written. Luke's writing shows him to be a highly educated man, one who wrote from a Greek background and a viewpoint. He wrote especially with Gentiles in mind, for he explained Jewish customs and traced the genealogy of Jesus back to Adam. So we look at the Gospels. You're going to have 4 different authors, their names on the books. They each, as you just read a little perspective, or I read a little perspective of where they're from, their background. They have different backgrounds, 4 different ones. And they're writing these to 4 different audiences, and we'll get into who's Luke's audience here in a minute. And then you have the 4 different elders presenting what they studied, what they wanted to talk about. Here's Matthew. He was a tax collector. That meant he worked for the Roman government. It meant that he was probably one of the most unpopular people sitting around, because he said, yeah, it's going to take your money. And often they put a little money extra aside for themselves. Don't have any record that he did that, but he's a tax collector. And then you have, he's talking primarily to Romans, probably people he worked with, cohorts, people who are other parts of the government there, and Jews, and they were expecting the Messiah. His emphasis was on Jesus' teachings, that he was not an earthly king. Why would he not want anybody to believe, a Roman especially, that he was an earthly king? Well, there was already a king. There were other kings that they appointed to be like a king, but they didn't have the powers. But the Roman emperor didn't want anybody to be taking the title of a king in any of the lands that he was overseeing. And then we talked about some key verses, and you see this one. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Then we come to Matthew. Now we come to Mark, follower of Peter. He was a scribe. That's all we know. We don't know what he did other than that, but he was literate. He was able to write this down. He writes primarily to the Jews. He's one himself, and as he wrote about mostly Jesus as a servant, conveyed that. His works and his authority. Why was he doing the things he was doing? And a key verse there is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. These are the profound verses that we remember oftentimes from these men. When Mark does the book of John, it'll be the first time he's dealing with somebody who was a fisherman. He spoke to the Jews, the Gentiles, just anybody that would listen to him. And his emphasis was Jesus is the Son of God. He's a deity. And there's the key verse, for God so loved the world. Most famous verse, it's put everywhere, on T-shirts, everywhere. So we come to Luke. By background, we know he's a physician. He's addressed to one person, his audience, Theophilus. You'll only find one other book in the Bible that is addressed to one person. Anybody know what that book is? Philemon. When we come to Acts, we're going to see the same thing we're going to see, because we're going to divulge what that's about. He wrote for people who had never heard of Jesus primarily, because he's probably writing this from Rome. Emphasis is Jesus is perfect. He's a Savior for all. The Messiah has come. And he's announcing this salvation. This is a new concept to many people that's in his audience group. The angels announced the good news of a great joy to the shepherds. And now then his motive, if you turn to the first chapter of Luke, in the first verse, you'll hear what his motive is. And I'll read it if you don't have a book with you. The first account I composed Theophilus. Oh, let me flip the page. The first, inasmuch as many have taken under to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. It seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus. And if you turned over to the book of Acts, and I think that's what Sam was answering, here's something else. This gives you a very short conclusion about what he's trying to do. In the first account I composed, that was Luke, here in Acts he's saying, I composed Theophilus at about all that Jesus began to do and teach, until the day he was taken up to heaven, after he had by the Holy Spirit been given orders to the apostles with whom he had chosen. He's given us what he's doing there. Now, why would he be writing this to one person, Theophilus? Everybody else, all the other books in the Bible were to people as a group or to the Jews. Moses principally talking to people that he was moving around. Why would he do that? Let's look at a little purpose that is behind his historical accuracy and what he is stating he's going to do. Anybody know what the word Theophilus, that name, means? James. Lover of God. Now, you'll find some commentaries where people are going to tell you, oh, that means he wrote it to a group of people, a bunch of people who love God. Hard to believe that he would do that, because he says very plainly he's speaking the person to one person. In the first person, he's talking to Theophilus there. Why would he be speaking to one person? By the way, his location he probably wrote this from, he's in Rome, because Paul's in jail there, and he's a traveling mate and disciple of Paul. Why do you think he'd be talking to one person about Jesus? I'm going to submit to you that this might be what he's doing. It could be what he's doing. It's not proven that it's what he's doing. Paul's in jail, and he's in Rome. You're going to have to hire a Roman attorney if you're in a Roman jail to represent you. So why would you want to hire a Roman attorney? How would you find one who knows something about Jesus in Rome at this time? It's going to be hard to find, really hard to find. So let's go with the thought that he is an attorney who's being hired. And then you're going to see that he's going to put together this orderly account. He's going to start from the beginning, and he's going to make sure that it's historically accurate, because he has some time to bring Theophilus up to speed. So chapters 1 and 2, he's dealing with the birth of Jesus. First thing he wants Theophilus to know is, who is this guy Jesus? He's going to give him some background. And he opens with the miraculous births, first of John the Baptist, and then Jesus. And the narrative highlights that these events fulfill God's ancient promises. He's laying it out for him. So when he gets to that part, he says, well, he's probably going to let him know on the side that there are other books that he might need to hear something about. After his birth in Bethlehem, the young Jesus is found in the temple, where his wisdom at an early age is revealed, preparing him for this guy is special. He's already in the temple at a very young age, and he's already speaking. And it's a preparation for his ministry, as covered in Luke 3 and 4. The story transitions to John the Baptist's ministry of preaching repentance. How new would that be to a lot of people in Rome? They don't know that they're in trouble. It's live. It's the more the merrier. They even had, in some of the places that they were in charge, like in Greece, they had a statue to the unknown God. They encouraged you to believe the hottest things, the newest things. They wanted you to be a part of the discussions. As long as you didn't put down Caesar, you were okay. He goes through in this section that Jesus withstands temptation by the devil in the wilderness and begins his public ministry around Galilee. Why would he start in Galilee? Very small place. It's a rural place. Jerusalem's the big city. The ports are big cities. Why would he start in Galilee? Here's one thing you should know about Galilee. If you're north of Israel now, and if you are west of Israel and you want to get to Egypt, you're going to go through Galilee because of the layout of the river, the layout of the mountains, and because of the trade routes. You go on the trade routes because you can't possibly carry enough food with you from a faraway land to get all the way to Cairo. So you're going to be wanting food. There are going to be merchants along this caravan, this trade route, that are going to give you food, sell you food. There are going to be a lot of things, too. You might have protection because there's robbers on these trade routes. So that is why he's starting his ministry in Galilee, because that's where he's going to meet people from around the world, and they're all headed through the Holy Land. And his sermon in Nazareth, where he announces his mission to bring good news to the poor, results in the rejection of his own hometown. What's the famous scripture about that? Prophet is not a prophet even in his own hometown, you know. How did his brothers react to this? What if you had a brother who said, you know, I've been sent here by God. Well, wait a minute, you were born to our mother. No. I'm here from God, and I'm here to save the world. Well, how do you think they would look into that? It's going to be a little incredulous, right? He's got some things to prove. So that's why he starts with the first bunch of skeptics he's going to meet in his entire career, his entire life. They're right there where he was born. It includes many well-known teaching and miracles. Did you know that the book of Luke has the most parables in it of any book in the Bible? As near as I can tell, it has 28 or 9 or 27. You can look at one commentary and say, oh, here's the 27 miracles, another here's 28, and maybe another's 29. If you go through them sort of methodically, you find that they were produced in an order that builds up a compatibility of what his mission here is on earth. So one of the first ones you come to is here in Luke 5. We'll get into some of the heart of this up in a minute here. What about the parable of the new cloth or the new leather being applied to an old wineskin? What do you think that's about? That's an odd thing. Sam, we've got this wineskin here and it's got a hole in it. I'm going to patch that with some newer leather over here. We're going to have that. It's going to be just fine. But he told him, no one puts a piece from a garment on an old garment, or else he will tear the new. And also the piece from the new will not match the one that's old. No one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put to the fresh skins, and both are preserved. No man having drunk old wine immediately desires new, for he says the old is better. Who followed that? You can't put old cloth on new cloth because it's going to tear. You can't fix an old wine. You can't put new wine in old. You got to, all these rules, and what's all that about? The big meaning of that has nothing to do with wine, by the way. It has to do with incompatibility, the improbability that you will be successful taking old customs, old superstitions, old things you were taught, and try to apply them to Christianity. Christianity is new. It's here. The Messiah has come. Have you heard of the parable of the speck in your eye versus the plank or the log in your eye? That's in Luke 6:39-42. He spoke a parable to them. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? The disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he fully trained, will be like his teacher. Why do you see the speck of chaff that is in your brother's eye, but don't consider the beam that's in your own eye? I was in the lumber industry for a long time. A plank is not the same as a beam. A board is not the same as a beam. A beam is something that's very dimensional that holds something up. That's the biggest thing, I think. You know, to put that in your eye, you would have to remove your neck. There would be nothing left of you. It's a beam. Or how can you tell your brother, brother, let me move that speck of chaff that's in your eyes when you yourself don't see the beam that's in your own eye? You hypocrite. First remove the beam from your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck of chaff that's in your brother's eye. What is Jesus talking about here? Beams and lumber and sawdust and things in people's eyes. What he's reminding us here, 2,000 years later, is hypocrisy. He uses the word hypocrites here. Hypocrisy is pointing out other people's ill doings, problems, ignorance, sins, when you ignore your own. And basically, he's saying, if you get to the point where you have no sins, then talk to somebody else about theirs. Here's another one. We're going to do the one that's in 6, it's 47 and 49, and it's called The Wise and the Foolish Builder. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you who he's like. He is like a man building a house, who dug and went deep and laid a foundation on the rock. When a flood arose, the stream broke against the house and could not shake it, because it was founded on the rock. But he who hears and doesn't do is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream broke, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of the house was great. Anything to do with house building? If you think this, how many people do you think Jesus is coming across that there are house builders? Some, but he's going to be in an area where they're mostly fishermen, people who are working in the trades, people who are doing a lot of things, but probably not a great population growth area where they're going to need a lot of houses. Well, what he is talking about is that when you build a foundation of belief, make sure it's one that's on strong ground, not one that's made up of beliefs and idioms and things that you heard about. Build it on solid ground. Let's do a few more of these, because 28 of these, we won't go through all of them. Not this time. Parable of the sower. That's in Luke 8, 5 through 15. Farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the road, and it was trampled underfoot, and the birds of the sky devoured it. Other seed fell on the rock, and as soon as it grew, it withered away because it had no moisture. Other fell amid the thorns, and the thorns grew and with it and choked it. Other fell into the good ground and grew and produced 100 times as much fruit. As he said these things, he called out, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." What do you think the reaction was of the disciples to that? I got ears. I'm all your ears. No. They said what most of us would probably come to when we would think of this. He said, to you it's known the mysteries of God's kingdom, but to the rest it is given in parables, that seeing may not see, and hearing may not understand. And what he's trying to do is to say, where were the seeds landing that they didn't produce? On rocks, on pathways, amongst other weeds that were going to choke them out. What he's saying is that before we devote ourselves to something like building a house, in this case building our own religion within our body or within our family, what he's saying is you examine what kind of soil you are. Are you a hard case? Yeah, been one of those in my life. Are you somebody that, I don't really care, it's just a bunch of seeds, some of them are going to grow here, and half of them end up in the thorns? Not going to produce anything. You had to pay for them. So it's pretty valuable advice when he uses an example like this to say, here's how you build anything. Make sure you're in the right soil. Make sure you're right for the reasons you're going to be doing. Okay, the Good Samaritan. Who has not ever heard of the story of the Good Samaritan? Not a single hand goes up. Okay. Found in Luke 10, verse 30 through 37. Jesus answered, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell amongst robbers. By the way, that's a trade route filled with risk. They stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. By chance, a certain priest was going down that way. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he traveled, came where he was, helped with his wounds with oil and wine, set him on his own animal, and brought him to an inn, and asked the innkeeper to take care of him, and he was going to pay all the bills. Whatever you spend beyond that, I'll repay you when I return. He showed mercy on him. So let's back up in a little bit. What is going on here? By chance, a certain priest was going on that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Why would a priest go away from somebody who's cut and bleeding? Because he would remain clean. He was a priest. He couldn't run the risk of soiling himself with somebody who has bodily fluids beaten out of them. He couldn't do that. And just to make sure that he's not talking about just the priest, he said, and somebody else came and walked on the other side for the same reason. Not my business. That fellow's got to take care of himself over there. And then he displayed compassion. He took out his own oil and his own wine that he was probably traveling with, and the wine is like a disinfectant. The oil is something that heals, brings oxygen, keeps bacteria from getting into wounds. And on the next day, he departed after he took him to a place, and he paid the guy's bills, somebody he'd never met before. What's a Samaritan? It's not a Jew. Probably not anybody that's a Christian. For the historical perspective of this, Samaritans had always historically been the enemy of the Jews. Horrible things happened. Jews would remember from 300 years back when Samaritans were brought in to run them out. You would call it, I guess you would call it a attempt to erase the Jewish race. Genocide. They came in, they took over their lands, they took over their pastures, their livestock, took everything, while the rest of the people were sent to Babylonia and other places during this time. Samaritan was not a friend of the Jew. And now we have a Jew in Jesus telling this story about this is about the best thing that you could ever imagine when you find somebody on the side of the road in a bad place, a trade route, who's been beaten and needs help. And Jesus left them with one message: go and do likewise. What are the chances that we're going to run into a Samaritan somewhere in our lifetime? Pretty small. What are the chances we're going to run into somebody who's going to need our help in our lifetime? Pretty large. Sometimes we don't have a lot of time to think about it, to lay out a plan. If somebody's bleeding, you should stop the bleeding, right? If they're incapable of taking care of themselves, you don't say, got that appointment to get to. Boy, if I'm late for work again, my boss is just going to kill me. No. Wherever he was going, whatever he was doing, the Samaritan was going to take this person to somebody who would take care of them while he could not. Go and do likewise. It's one of the most powerful images we'll ever get. Luke 10, 30 through 37. Anybody remember the parable of the rich fool as opposed to the poor fool? That suggests what the Bible does when it says that there's a rich fool. That must mean that there's some of us that are just fools, right? Luke 12, verses 16 to 21. No, go 12, 35 to 40. 35 to 40. Let your waist be dressed and your lamps burning. Be like men watching for the Lord when he returns from the wedding feast. When he comes and knocks, and they may immediately open to him. Blessed are those servants who, it's about a rich guy. And he's the master of the house. And he says, get the house closed up. Because what happens after midnight? Anybody here have your parents? And Heather's leaving now because I probably asked her that question. It was like, let me tell you what happens good at midnight, Heather. Nothing. And it's getting dark. Who's the us in this? What it is a preparation parable. What are we preparing for? We're preparing for the return of the Lord, right? We're preparing for that day that all the body is assembled and together again. We're preparing for that. And what I like about when you see an introduction, not that this is to impress you with anything, but 4 elders who are presenting the gospel and doing that, it's not like this 4 elders who have not studied this before. It's not like we haven't been to church for a long time. I don't know, I'd hate to do the arithmetic because that would give away how old I am, but I'd say the 4 elders have been on this earth for 300 years, maybe more. Mark making up the balance of that, Lane, new guy. But are we prepared? That's why we come to church. That's why we join a body of God's believers. That's why we study. That's why we devote our time to being with others. That's why we devote our reading, not because what I fear sometimes people that are giving the greatest bad advice you've ever seen about Christianity and running it down are always seemingly in their discussions on television with, I've read the Bible. What do you get if you've read the Bible? You've had one go at it. Now, Tom Johnson, you said this morning in class that you read the Bible at least 2.5 times a year, right? How many years you been reading the Bible, Tom? I'll do the arithmetic. And how long has Alberta been gone? 7 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You'll always learn something. So Tom's just given testimony to what's helped him through the losing of his wife in death is the comfort of the Bible. And during that time, a man who's been to preaching school, who's been going to church since he was a kid, has learned things because he shares them with us. And he learns, and he continues to learn things. How many of you had never heard that there were 28 parables in the book of Luke? How many of you never heard what the word Theophilus means? And this is what God is trying to let us know. So far we've talked about we have to have the right soil conditions. We have to have the right mindset. And occasionally we have to do something that it's a big change. Don't throw your guests out of your house because it's getting dark and you're afraid the thieves may come and do something bad for you. Don't fail to do something for somebody on the side of the road because, well, you know, let the authorities handle that. So as we continue this in another week, we'll be going through a few more parables like this, but we're going to see that Luke starts with a chronology, just as he promised in both Acts and Luke. He starts with, there were miraculous births, because he's telling a guy who may not know anything about Christianity. There were births. Oh, wait a minute. Everybody was born. These are miraculous births. Here's what those men did. Here's how they started. Jesus didn't be sent to earth as a grown man who could immediately go out and put on his ministry. He came to earth as a baby. He had to learn things. He had to learn how to walk, how to grow, what to do, put up with brothers who didn't believe in him. But he was a fast learner, apparently, right? And why was he a fast learner? Because he got baptized. He had the Holy Spirit. And he had God because he was God. Well, that's all we'll be doing for tonight. And hope you'll come back next week and we'll try to finish up with the rest of what we have to say about the book of Luke.